The Formulary controversy was a 17th and 18th century Jansenist refusal to confirm the formula of submission for the Jansenists on the part of a group of Catholic ecclesiastical personnel and teachers who did not accept the charge that their beliefs about the nature of man and grace were heretical, as the Holy See declared. In the Kingdom of France, it pitted Jansenists against Jesuits. It gave rise to Blaise Pascal's Lettres provinciales, the condemnation of casuistry by the Holy See, and the dissolution of organized Jansenism. Context: during the Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563, the Roman Catholic Church reaffirmed, against Protestantism, both the reality of human liberum arbitrium, free will, i.e., non-necessary character of human will, and the necessity of divine grace. Catholicism was then divided into two main interpretations, Augustinism and Thomism, which both agreed on predestination and on efficacious grace, or irresistible grace, which meant that, while divine will infallibly comes to pass, grace and free will were not incompatible. Augustinism was rather predominant, in particular in the University of Leuven, where a rigid form of Augustinism, Baianism, was articulated by Michael Blaise. Blaise's heterodox propositions on the nature of man and grace were condemned in the papal bull Ex Omnibus Afflictionibus, promulgated by Pope Pius V in 1567, as heretical. According to Joseph Solier, in Catholic Encyclopedia, Blaise's concept of the primitive state of man was Pelagian, his presentation of the downfall was Calvinist, and his theory of redemption was more than Lutheran and close to Socinian. Following the Council of Trent, two rival theories emerged in the Church. Under the influence of the ideas of the Renaissance, the newly founded Society of Jesus asserted the role of free will, with authors such as George de Montemayor, Gregory of Valencia, Leonardus Lessius and Johannes Homilius. The Jesuit Luis Molina published De Liberi Arbitrae cum Gratia et Donis Divina Prescientia, Predestinatione Reprobatione Concordia in 1588, which asserted that God offers his grace to all people, and that it was by an act of free will that each one accepted it or rejected it. Molina's theology of a sufficient grace became popular, but the lack of differentiation between sufficient and efficacious grace, along with the assertion of counterfactual definiteness, was opposed by large sectors of the Church who considered it incompatible with God's sovereignty or goodness. In opposition, the Jansenists claimed to espouse Augustinism, which insisted on a separate determining efficacious grace. The Jesuits accepted Augustine's assertion of the necessity of grace, but rejected the notion that there was any substantial difference between sufficient and efficacious grace. Both determine man's behavior to an extent. A similar controversy arose between the Dominicans and Jesuits, which led Pope Clement VIII to establish the Congregatio de Auxiliaries, 1597 to 1607, in order to settle the debate. Although the issue seemed unfavorable to modernism, the issue finally was suspended rather than solved. Pope Paul V, in a 1611 Holy Office decree, prohibited publication without prior examination by the Inquisition of all works, including commentaries, about the aid of grace. Pope Urban VIII, in a 1625 Holy Office decree and a 1640 Holy Office decree, confirmed Paul V's decree and warned about censures such as withdrawal of teaching and preaching faculties as well as excommunication. It was often informally violated by writings presented as commentaries of Thomas Aquinas. Theological debate. In 1628, Cornelius Jansen, a professor at Leuven, began writing Augustinus, a 3-volume treatise on Augustine of Hippo which conflated Jesuits with Pelagianism by highlighting Augustine's propositions. Augustinus was published posthumously in 1640 at Louvain, in 1641 at Paris, and in 1642 at Rouen. Augustinus reignited the debate appeased by the Congrégatio d'Auxiliaires in France. Cardinal Armand Jean du Plessis de Richelieu strongly opposed Jansen, in part because Jansen wrote a pamphlet, Mars Gallicus, 1635, against Richelieu's anti-Habsburg policy and alliances with German states. Richelieu therefore charged Isaac Habit, the theologian of Notre Dame, to preach against Pelagius. Richelieu nominated Alphonse Lemoyne as a professor to the College of Sorbonne in order to refute Augustinus. Many Sorbonne theologians opposed Richelieu, as they mostly followed Augustinism's insistence on efficacious grace. But the Jansenists of the convent of Port Royal were Lemoyne's and Habit's main opponents. In 1638, Richelieu had its leader, Jean du Verger de Hauran, incarcerated in Vincennes. Verger de Hauran was a friend of Jansen. His incarceration gave him further influence as a martyr. After Richelieu's death in 1642, Jansenists replied to the attacks against Jansen, first in Sanctus Augustinus Percipsum Docens Catholicos, a Vincens Pelagianos, attributed to the Oratory in Colin du Winnet and sometimes to Antoine Arnaud, and then, in 1644–45, by 2 Apologies pour M. Jansenius, Apologies for Jansenius, by Antoine Arnaud, which enjoyed great success. Finally, at the request of the Apostolic Nuncio to Brussels, Georg Pauli Stravius, and the Apostolic Nuncio to Cologne, Fabio Chigi, Urban VIII prohibited Augustinus in eminenti ecclesiae in 1642 because Augustinus was published in opposition to condemnations and prohibitions in decrees of Paul V, and Urban VIII was expressed with contempt toward the authority of the Holy See, and contained previously condemned propositions. Pope Innocent X, in a 1647 Holy Office decree, condemned proposition, found in Jansenist Martin de Barcos's preface to Antoine Arnaud's 1644 De la Frequente Communion, that Peter the Apostle and Paul the Apostle are 2 supreme pastors and governors of the Church, who constitute a single head, and they are 2 princes of the Church who amount to one. When the proposition is interpreted to imply a complete equality between Peter and Paul, without the subordination and subjection of Paul to Peter in power and governance, then the proposition is heretical. In opposition to Jansenism, a group of theological doctors from the Sorbonne extracted 8 propositions from Augustinus. These propositions concerned the relation between nature and grace. They accused Jansen of having misinterpreted Augustine, conflating Jansenists with Lutherans, in the frame of a highly conflictual context, which had led to the French Wars of Religion, officially ended with the 1598 Edict of Nantes. On May 31, 1653, Innocent X promulgated the Apostolic Constitution cum occasione, which condemned 5 propositions found in Augustinus as heretical. In 1654, Arnaud replied to cum occasione by making a distinction between de jure and de facto. De jure, the heretical propositions could be condemned, and he accepted this sentence. But de facto, they could not be found in Jansen's treaty. The Sorbonne then attempted to exclude Arnaud from being a theologian. Arnaud was forced underground, while in January 1654 an almanac attributed to the Jesuits grossly presented the Jansenists as undercover Calvinists. Arnaud's nephew, Louis Isaac Lemaitre de Sacy, a translator of the Bible de Port Royal, wrote in Lumineuse, a poem. In reply to this attack, Pascal, under the pseudonym Louis de Montalt, wrote Lettres provinciales in 1657, in defense of Arnaud, in which he harshly attacked Jesuits and their morality, in particular casuistry. Following publication of Lettres provinciales, the king sent spies everywhere, condemned the librarians who had clandestinely published Lettres provinciales, and discovered the author of Lettres provinciales. The theological debate had turned into a political affair. On 16 October 1656, Alexander VII promulgated the Apostolic Constitution ad sanctum Beati Petri Sedum, which judged the meaning and intention of Jansen's words in Augustinus, and confirmed and renewed the condemnation in Cum Occasiona. The Jesuits enjoyed predominant political and theological power. Their members included two personal confessors to the King of France, François Annet, and, before him, Nicolas Coursan. Cardinal Jules Mazarin strongly opposed Jansenists, both in Europe and abroad, with the Jesuit reductions in the Jesuit China missions. Mazarin persuaded the Pope to compel Jansenists to sign a formulary to assent to ad sanctum Beati Petri Sedum, and to confess their faults. The Assembly of the French clergy afterwards decided to compel all priests to sign an anti-Jansenist formulary, in which each one accepted the papal condemnation. One of Pascal's last works was Écrit sur la signature du formulaire in 1661, in which he adamantly opposed subscribing to a formulary and radicalized Arnaud's position. Pascal equivocated that condemning Jansen was equivalent to condemning Augustine, a father of the Church. The Jansenists of Port Royal, who included members of the Arnaud family, such as Abbess Marie-Angélique Arnaud, Antoine Arnaud, Agnes Arnaud, Pierre Nicole, Sir, were forced to subscribe to the formula of submission for the Jansenists. Although ostensibly submitting to papal authority, they added that the condemnation would only be effective if the 5 propositions were in fact found in Augustinus, and claimed that they did not figure there. Jansenists reasoned that Innocent X and Alexander VII had the power to condemn heretical propositions, but not to make that what did not figure in Augustinus be there. This strategy would impose decades of theological disputes and debate, thus allowing them to gain time. Lettres provinciales stimulated several responses from the Jesuits, including in 1657 the publication of the anonymous Apologie pour les casuistes contre les calomnies des Jansenistes, written by Father Georges Perrault. It rather unfortunately claimed as its own Pascal's interpretations of the casuists' propositions, in particular concerning controversial propositions about homicides. This led the Friars of Paris to condemn Jesuit casuistry. On February 15, 1665, Alexander VII promulgated the Apostolic Constitution Regimenis Apostolici, which required, according to the Intruridian Symbolorum, all ecclesiastical personnel and teachers to subscribe to an included formulary. The formula of submission for the Jansenists, assenting to both Cum Occasiona and ad sanctum Beati Petri Sedum. From then on, Jansenists at Port Royal ceased publishing Lettres provinciales, and, along with Pascal, started collaborating with the Écrits des Curés, friars' writings, which condemned casuistry. 2 further decrees, of the 24th of September 1665 and the 18th of March 1666, condemned the casuists' laxist morality. Pope Innocent XI issued a second condemnation in a 2 March 1679 decree. In total, the Vatican had condemned 110 propositions issued by casuists, 57 of which had been treated in Lettres provinciales. The books added to the Index Librorum Prohibitorum in Rome were however published in France. Jesuits had beforehand bypassed the Holy See's censorship by publishing controversial books there. On July 16, 1705, Pope Clement XI promulgated the Apostolic Constitution Binem Domini Sabaruth, which declared that obediential silence is not a satisfactory response to the formula of submission for the Jansenists. Pascal and some other Jansenists equivocated that condemning Jansen was equivalent to condemning Augustine, and adamantly refused assent to the formula of submission for the Jansenists, with or without a mental reservation. This in turn led to the further radicalization of the king and of the Jesuits. And in 1661 the convent of Port Royal was closed and the Jansenist community dissolved. It would be ultimately raised in 1710 on orders of Louis XIV. The controversy not only involved papal authority, but rather papal authority concerning the interpretation of texts, something Pascal recalled by quoting the Jesuit Cardinal Robert Bellamine's sentences concerning the authority of religious councils concerning matters of dogma versus de facto issues. See also compatibilism and incompatibilism. Congregatio de Auxiliaries. A similar debate between the Jesuits and the Dominicans. Unigenitus de Filius, an apostolic constitution promulgated by Pope Clement XI in 1713 which condemned 101 Jansenist propositions of Pascal Quinel as heretical. Ex Omnibus Christiani Orbis, an encyclical promulgated by Pope Benedict XIV. Notes. Citations.